Thank you for joining us today for this breakout session. So we're going to be looking at the value of multi-agency or place-based working, as some of you may know it, to improve community safety outcomes. So my name's Georgie Headley. I'm Tech UK's Justice and Emergency Services Programme Manager. Joining me today, though I will ask each panellist to introduce themselves properly before we get started. We have Dan from the City of London Police, we have Emran from Redbridge Council, Steve from the National Innovation Centre for Data, and Phil, Professor of Urban Data at Newcastle University. So for those of you who are able to join other sessions as part of the summit, you'll know that this summit is exploring the role of technology in recovering, rebuilding, or building back better. So looking ahead, how can we plan? How can we plan ahead, future gaze, and explore what comes next? And how do we achieve this together so that people in their communities, localities can thrive? We know the challenges in our communities can't be faced alone. And for us to create safe communities, public services and organisations need to come together. So hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be hearing some excellent use cases directly from our panel on exactly this. So some of those successes, but also some of those challenges as well. During the pandemic, place-based working or multi-agency working has it's become the norm. We've seen organisations such as police, local authorities work together to support the most vulnerable. And all of this has been enabled by having the right digital infrastructure in place. As most of you will know, Tech UK has long supported policing and local government partners on their digital transformation journeys. And now, especially in the response to the pandemic, with a key focus on delivering improved service transformation through multi-agency working. Over the last few months, will be coming on a year in March, we have seen the tremendous efforts from these organisations. We heard earlier on in the society session, this mention of new ways of working. We're looking at this idea of the new normal. So this is something we are also going to explore today and looking ahead at the role of digital. So before I hand over to Dan from the City of London Police to open and give us his thoughts and explain his work, I do just want to quickly say, please use the chat function to ask any questions you have for our panel. All questions are actually going to hopefully be answered at the end of our 3 presentations. During this time, we'll be able to have a bit of a round table conversation, so long as there's time. But don't worry if we run out of time and we don't have time to answer all your questions. These will be answered as part of the follow-up. Okay, so that's it from me. Dan, I'm now going to hand over to you to get us started.
Lovely. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please do.
It says it's disabled at the moment.
If you want to get started, we'll just look at
So firstly, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dan Baker. I'm a police officer with the City of London Police, and my core role with the City Police is I'm a CT coordinator. So effectively, I review intelligence and then create a strategic plan as to where we place police asset in the prevention of crime, reconnaissance, and any attack type events within the City of London. So that's my role. And as part of that role, obviously COVID meant that the City of London was an ever-changing place, a place that had 500,000 people working on site on a daily basis, going down to really quite low numbers through the first lockdown. Now, when the first lockdown hit, we were then trying to understand what does that mean for our policing environment, and obviously troubleshooting that, I created an application that tracked footfall, highlighted vulnerabilities, so therefore we could then strategically place police asset in the right places. We created a dashboard and a system that feeds in not just by police, but by businesses themselves. They're actually giving us live information to update the dashboard. And So therefore we can understand more granular detail of where we've got pockets of people, where we might have issues, where we might not have 24-hour security now because of COVID, because of cutbacks. So therefore we could plug gaps for burglary risk or such like. Can I share now? Brilliant. Has that come up? Lovely.
Yeah,
I'm going to go straight to slide 3 first. Now, this is the dashboard that we created, and I'll just quickly run through how it works. On this left-hand side is an open space survey that police officers deliver. So these are all our streets and aggregate spaces, all of our top areas that have come from the crowded spaces review through the police, and our project servitor teams deliver these surveys. They have a better understanding of vulnerability. So if they find any vulnerabilities, they can write that up within the notes section. It directly feeds into the dashboard. So someone like me and our CTSAs and our special branch colleagues can review that information, as well as our sector policing, our community policing. So then we can send out people to plug the gaps as and when they are highlighted. That could be a simple thing through COVID that we've found, that a change in rush hour times at transport hubs, and we want to make sure that we're sending police there during those time periods. So they feed in there, and they are instantaneously added to the dashboard as they're sent. Secondly, the business survey. So at the moment, we've captured nearly 200,000 of the normal workforce in the City of London. Normally, we have 500,000, but the benefit of this open space survey is that it qualifies things like shops as either being open, partially open, or shut. So we're getting an understanding of perhaps the smaller business that's in the city, and we wouldn't necessarily want to give them a business survey to overpopulate the map and sort of distort the analysis. So the business surveys, very simple. I've got a slide to go through what they look like. It's a very simple survey, whether they tell us whether they're open or shut, and their normal capacity, and then their on-site numbers now. What I'll do is I'll just go back to slide 2, and what you can see here, these are the surveys that that they're filling out. So this is the officer survey here, where they're qualifying the area, and these are filters inbuilt to those locations that we want them to go to, and they're qualifying areas whether they are busy, quiet, business as usual, busy or crowded. Therefore, when we go to the dashboard, we can actually understand the city as a whole and have a quick snapshot of analysis, but we can look into that in a deeper way. And then the business surveys here, they're giving us that comparable data of what they've got on site at the moment against their normal capacity, whether they're 24-hour security or not. And then there's a direct link here into this, from this survey into our CTSA inbox, so they can direct talk with our team if they've got any issues or vulnerabilities that they want to highlight. I'll flick back to this. So as you can see, the overview of the city footprint in the middle here, this is an interactive map, and these reels here are interactive. So if I want to understand a business on this side, I can click on it and it will take everything else out. I can understand exactly what is going on at that business site. Now, the business sites on this map are these sort of pinky coloured dots, and the larger the dot, the more people that are working at that site. So this large dot here, there's over 1,000 people working at that area. And the blue dots report to construction sites, and these blue and green dots here are these open space surveys. And if you probably can't see, but if you could zoom in and actually see it properly, you'll see that they've got road signs attached to them, or bridges if they're a bridge, or tube if they're a tube station. So it's an easy overview. You then got the on-site number. So this is a snapshot in time from the past, that out of this 186,000 that we qualified here, only 13,242 people were working on site at that time against that capacity number. So that reports to about sort of 7%. So we're then understanding actually the full footfall of the city, or at least the general trend, based on the fact that we've captured nearly 200,000 people. This then generates analysis down here, and there's an arrow here that we can flick through multiple graphs and charts that are provided by the data that's input here. And this one here highlights in red the sites that haven't got 24-hour security and the ones that have. I'll move on to the next slide. You can then filter this dashboard down to, I've done it to a sector here, but you can do it down to an individual cluster. So this line here represents an individual cluster, the Liverpool Street cluster. And you've got Fenchurch and Monument here. So you can break it down, and the dashboard changes, the figures change, you're understanding what security you have in each area, what numbers on site each time. And therefore also, if we look at this, we can say, and what I can say from this year is this Broadgate area has always had a high number of people, and it has meant that we could target our police engagement in and around those areas. So we're capturing if there's a crowded space, because criminality goes hand in hand with crowded places. In terms of the future, because I appreciate that I haven't got loads of time, we want to develop this product out. We're now looking to create a note section for businesses where they can start to interact with us. This is going to give us better links for any sort of activity that's happening in and around their building. So it could be protest activity that they've got groups, or it could be down to nighttime economy where there's crowds that have spilled out from pubs, clubs, and there's a concern around any form of criminality around there. This is about prevention. This is about attributing the right resource at the right time, and utilizing that type of flow of information between everyone. We can then get that prevention in. We're now looking to survey licensed premises, create a bespoke survey for them, so we do understand our nighttime economy when we're outside of COVID. You know, they're going to be delivering information, so we understand the changing nature of the city from the business epicenter that it is to the nighttime economy, and where our crowded places change. Therefore, again, we can start to do targeted engagement, targeted patrols in prevention of any sort of crime or CT. This then sort of links in with other apps that we're looking to create and tools to review. We're looking to get this in our control room so they can understand the live feed and the talk between businesses and police alike. And this has meant that we could actually understand the city in the changing nature that it is. But this product has been brilliant throughout COVID, but it has longevity, and developing it out and linking in with community work and community teams, community leaders. You can start to add in extra information into this so we can understand the city as a whole. I could go on for some time, but I think I'm getting near my time. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of questions. I can't see if I stop sharing.
Just a reminder for everyone to put questions in the chat function, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them after the three presentations. But no, that's great. Thank you, Dan. But yeah, a reminder to everyone just to pop your questions in the chat function. But no, really useful, obviously, to see how this technology, technology like this is being used, especially when we look at how it can support in that sort of in frontline policing, and then sort of, as you've touched on, sort of looking ahead, how this technology can be used more broadly outside that response to COVID, sort of that broad community safety element. So yeah, remind everyone listening, please put your questions in the chat function. But no, thanks, Dan, and hope we'll come back to you after we've heard next from Emran.
Afternoon, all. I am, so it's Emran Saigo. I am the Operational Director for Digital Customers and Community Safety. I'm joined on the call by Mandy Vanderpoy, who's our Digital Inclusion Lead, and she'll just cover off a couple of the points that we want to get across today. So I'm also equally conscious of time, and so I'm going to dive right in. So I think one of the points in the brief around this was really about the fact that we are coming out of a pandemic. I think from a local authority perspective, we're still very much in the midst of a pandemic, and the changing nature of that pandemic has been one that has really seen the kind of collaboration, the partnership work, and the place-based working as excuse me, as being a real strength that's fallen out of the work that we've done, and that's kind of stretched into in the main around building relationships, building a network of partners, of volunteers, of residents, of community groups, faith forums, and the list goes on and on and on, who have kind of come forwards in their droves across the borough, much like most local authorities out there, to assist and help us as an authority in our response and our ongoing response. And that's been through services that we've pulled together, such as our wellbeing services. We've looked at bringing together everything from mobile testing units, fixed site testing units, track and trace services, setting up, mobilizing 3,500 members of staff to work in a cloud-based sense, spinning up contact centers overnight, and we could go on, and you would have heard in, I'm sure, many conversations that or talks that other authorities have done about the fantastic response that's happened and continues to happen. I think the key there has been, as Dan just touched on, has been data, the sheer volume of data that we have suddenly found ourselves in possession of, making sense of that data, using our business intelligence teams to tell those stories, to everything from ranging around vulnerability to support payments to tasking, community safety tasking on a week-to-week basis, and using that intelligence to better inform how we work in collaboration with the police on a week-to-week basis around community safety. So the work done to this day has been vast. The real strength and where we find ourselves in is a place where we are starting to look ahead. We're looking at some of those kind of key priorities for us as an organisation. One of those priorities has been around community safety, a real political priority for us. For us to reshape, to really kind of rethink our community safety partnership priority. We've used those networks that we've developed over the course of the last 10 odd months to drive through a body of work that's centered around talking to the community and those community groups and engaging those communities in talking to us about crime and what their fears, their thoughts, their feelings are on crime across the borough. So far, as it says there on the slide, just over 2,350 people have completed surveys. That is the most responded to survey that the council has ever undertaken. I think on average with any kind of consultation, we always look at around about 600 as being the average in terms of return. So it shows that not just the strength of feeling and people wanting to be involved in that conversation around crime, but also the fact that working and doing this in a digital sense has really allowed people to engage in far greater numbers than they would have done. 28 engagement sessions, over 300 residents, giving up a couple of hours of their time to talk to us, to use tools, very fun tools such as Mentimeter, to really kind of gauge and kind of test some of our thoughts and some of the questions that we're looking to put out there. And all of that will inform our crime commission that we will be pulling together, which is again the key objectives, really looking at how we kind of move our strategy forward, our action plans, our partnership working, how we can better our response to community safety going forward. I'll hand over to Mandy to talk about some of the other work that we're doing. So Mandy, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Emran. So how has that technology improved our collaboration? Well, technology's enabled us to mobilise a lot quicker. Pre-pandemic, it would have taken us a long time to bring a coordinated borough response around any issue. And it would have taken months to get agreements and people to engage, and also the right people around the table at the same time. So with technology, we've been able to bring people from across various locations within the borough together, even though actually they're probably even further apart than they would normally have been pre-lockdown, because they're all over the country now. So that virtual space has freed up space and time for people to attend. And at the same time, it's enabled us to really shorten our discussions if we've realised that actually it's the wrong people we've got around the table, or people just aren't engaged in a particular issue. So obviously with more diary space available, no additional costs, etc., we found it a lot easier to access people who we may not have before, and that's across all sectors. The virtual space has also provided opportunities from within our partnership organisations to join in to sessions that probably wouldn't have been able to before. Normally, there's limited space within rooms. Certainly from the council's perspective, sometimes it can be quite overbearing when there's a lot of council members around the table. But with this has been able, digital access and putting things virtually has certainly enabled a lot more people to join in from various organisations and open up learning opportunities for our staff and enabled them to access people across all sorts of levels. It's also provided better networking opportunities for staff as they can attend virtual events, global events from around the world. You could go to any session around the world, which normally would have cost a fortune in sending people to as delegates. Now they're available, mostly freely available online. It's also enabled us to engage various levels of the organisation and residents together, whereas before we may have had to do everything separately. We've now been able to get the right people in the room who are interested in a particular topic, and mine in particular is digital inclusion. And that's given us a really richer perspective and makes it a more collaborative decision-making process. But there have been barriers. It's not just about delivering digitally. We need to look at inclusion as well. And post-pandemic, what will we understand inclusion to mean? So we're looking at a new approach as an organisation to resolve this increasingly urgent place-based issue. We know that we've got about 38,000 residents right now who have really little or no digital skills and are probably really struggling, but it's really hard to reach out to them, even with our wellbeing services up and running. So we are bringing the knowledge and resources of our local partners and pan-London organisations as well. So we've been speaking to Lottie and other local authorities, and we've been talking to national campaigners as well, and we'll be bringing everybody together to understand the extent of exclusion and digital poverty. It's clear that no one organisation is going to be able to solve the problem by themselves, so we need to mobilise around the problem as a collective for the borough and take that place-based approach. Digital poverty is more than not being able to get online. Right now, I think we've got one library open at the moment. Cafes are all shut. So where people would ordinarily access free Wi-Fi and devices, that's not available to them now. We've now got multiple members of households needed to get online at the same time. We've got parents who have had to learn new skills or not in order to teach their children on tablets or phones or devices they're not used to using. And on top of that, making sure that their kids are safe online. So inclusion has always been an issue, and we knew it was an issue and we were working on it before, but it's even a wider issue now than we ever thought. And we're actually quite lucky in Redbridge that we're in London, so there's a lot of infrastructure already in place, but we are still struggling. And we won't be able to fully understand the extent of the problem until the pandemic is over. But we have a good understanding of what our teachers, our charities, our council employees, and our children are experiencing. And we also don't want, what we don't know is what post-lockdown will mean and how people will transition from lockdown and what that new normal life is going to look like. So is the digital divide still going to be as important to people? Will partnership be able to keep up the momentum and keep it going? Is it still going to be on the agenda and at the forefront of people's minds? So we would like a wider partnership approach across sectors and industry, and for people to join us in order to share their data, their ideas, their knowledge, come on board with campaigns that we may want to run jointly with other organisations, and just keep the issue in view and full sight of everybody, because we don't know what the next phase of the pandemic is going to be. And filling that digital poverty gap is not a bridge that we alone can do by ourselves, and we need a joint approach, not just across Redbridge, but across the nation, really. And so anyone who's interested, our details are here, Emran's details are here, my details are here, so please do get in touch. Thank you. Brilliant,
thank you, Emran and Mandy. That was, I think it very much resonates with sort of, what Dan has said, and I'm sure what both Steve and Phil are about to touch on as well, around this sort of this use of data and that sort of data quality and standards piece, and how this is used to respond or prevent, that sort of those community issues, looking at it from a safety perspective. And of course, collaboration, collaboration is key for those sort of that multi-agency working. And, I think it's important as well when we look at sort of the value of technology and how this can support our communities, to also make sure that we're looking at those barriers. And, you've touched on sort of the digital exclusion piece there, and, what we need to do as a collective to address that. So thank you. And I know there's some questions coming through. So we will, once we've heard from Steve and Phil, we will come back to these questions after for a bit of a discussion. But now over to Steve and Phil. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgina. I'll just share my screen. So my name is Steve Coggy, and I am the director of the National Innovation Centre for Data. And I'm talking to you today alongside Phil James, who's the head of the Urban Observatory at Newcastle University. And we often, when we talk about the Northeast, we talk about how we're moving from a coal mining past to a data mining future. And both Phil and I are data people, so we're going to address that issue. And in particular, we're going to talk about how we've been working collaboratively across the region, accelerated by the collective response to COVID, to deliver better and more timely information to our decision makers in the region. So Phil's going to kick off by talking about some of the practical work we're doing right now across the region, and then I'm going to talk about some of our future plans. So over to you first, Phil.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Georgina. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Urban Observatory Programme, which is a BEIS-funded research project of about 4 million that's trying to capture and integrate data at the level of a city to understand the benefits and issues from the sort of new paradigm of, and I'm going to use the phrase, although I don't like it, smart cities, enabled through the Internet of Things and sensors. And this is a true multi-agency operation here in the Northeast, utilising the triple helix of research, local and regional government and industry. It's the UK's largest operational city sensing network with over 4,000 active sensor streams and over 10 billion observations, capturing the heartbeat of the city in data. This equates to 10,000 new observations every minute of every day, which we provide free access to in real time through an open data portal. Next slide, please, Steve. And the aim of this is simply to support better decisions, not only to provide evidence before intervention, but crucially to provide data on the intended and unintended consequences of those interventions, as that change ripples across the city and through the different sectors. In Newcastle in the Northeast, we measure over 80 city indicators using all types of sensing equipment. And we also integrate data from many other organizations who capture that data for operational purposes. For instance, as the slide shows here, we use the Northeast Combined Authority's 514 traffic cameras as virtual sensors, repurposing them to count traffic and pedestrians across the network. The goal is to be able to carry out robust experiments in cities through close observation and to learn from success and failure when we do intervene. Next slide, please, Steve. As we had all of this infrastructure already in place when COVID hit, within hours of the first lockdown, we were able to provide local decision makers and public health with real-time updates of how those policies and instructions were playing out on the ground through a real-time dashboard of these key indicators: traffic across the network, pedestrian movements, energy usage, a whole bunch of key indicators. This data has also been provided to other national players, the Department for Transport and Number 10 directly. And I think it demonstrates the value and agility that real-time comprehensive data systems looking across the whole holistic piece of cities can provide. Next slide, please. Of course, I like data, but data's not the only, not the answer. It's just part of the solution. And data in its raw form often is of no use whatsoever without further work. So as part of a multi-agency group, we repurposed some of these data feeds to provide live updates to the public who might be planning a visit to the city centre, indicating whether it was safe to travel based on pedestrian flows and other key indicators. And that website went live a few months ago. It's called How Busy is Toon, which anyone can go and have a look at and see what's happening on the ground right now in the city centre and understand whether it's safe to go there. Of course, there's very few people there at the moment. The model that we've created for How Busy is for Toon has attracted further funding from MHCLG, and we'll be rolling that out to a number of authorities over the next few weeks and months. And as we move from lockdown to recovery, these indicators will again provide key data on the economic revival and also whatever this new normal ends up looking like. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Phil. That's great. So Phil's talked there about one of the assets that we've been able to use in the Northeast, which is this fantastic urban observatory. The other one that we have is this new National Innovation Centre for Data. And this is the picture of the building of the new NICD, as we call it. What we're trying to build here is a beacon for data innovation, a place where people will go to understand and be inspired by the potential of using data for social, economic, environmental, etc. purposes. We have world-class facilities and services under one roof. Fat lot of good that does us at the moment because we can't get in. We're all about this third bullet point, though. We're all about helping organizations get the skills they need to get insight from their data. As Phil pointed out, data itself is the first step maybe, but getting the insight is the hard thing, right? If we can pass those skills on, and we do that through very practical projects, with real return on investment, where we transfer knowledge and skills into an organization. If we can do that, then those people themselves are the ones who can innovate with new products and services and better processes throughout the region. So just more generally now about how regions and cities attempt to utilize data. The model often is that people will take data from lots of different sources. They'll push it into some sort of data refinery. Maybe that's an open data portal or something. And they'll push that refined data out in the hope that regional organizations will use that data in order to generate insight. And the problem with all of that is that without the skills necessary to dive into and analyze that data, the regional organizations don't know what to do with it. They don't understand how to utilize it. So there's no demand, and ultimately there's no insight. So our argument in the Northeast is you have to combine the delivery of that data with the delivery of skills to help organizations utilize that data. And in the Northeast, we're blessed with lots of skills. We have 5 universities bringing out lots of people with data skills. We have lots of public sector data and private sector data in the Northeast. We have these 2 great assets, NICD delivering skills to help organizations, and the Urban Observatory delivering data to help organizations. And the other thing is that we've engaged with regional organizations in healthcare and local government in the private sector in multiple projects over the last few years, and we've unlocked the demand for help with real projects to let them deliver insight, and by doing so, drive innovation, efficiency, and growth. So we're very well placed, we feel, to exploit this. If we can do that, we'll drive more skills by attracting more people into the profession. We'll attract more data to be utilized more broadly across the region, and that'll attract new businesses and create new business and generate new funding. And the thing that we're doing regionally to try to help pull all this together is we're starting to create an office for data analytics. So this is a center that will gather data, have access to the skills necessary to analyze this data, and then hopefully be able to respond quickly to the next crisis or to post-COVID recovery in order to deliver relevant information to decision makers across the region. Okay, that's me. I think we went under 8 minutes, Phil. Good timing.
Brilliant. No, I think you have. So that's brilliant. I think really important to touch on there the skills and how to, I guess, interpret this data. And like I said, it seems to be sort of a key theme. You know, we looked at the Police Digital ICT Summit last week. For those that were able to attend, there was a focus on data for a whole day of data, looking at that quality and standards piece, and actually, bringing in skills. It's important that those who are having to read this data and understand this data have the skills in order to do so. So I think it's key, and it's sort of a bit of an underpinning point here as to sort of collaboration and that sort of multi-agency approach, and how data is being shared and stored. We've had a couple of questions come through, so I'd quite like to bring Dan back into the conversation. Someone's asked if your dashboard is going to be linked with NACSO information sharing platform. And I think just building on that as well, and obviously your role as sort of CT coordinator in the city, when we're looking at this from a community safety standpoint, we've looked at this in the response to COVID, but more broadly speaking, how do you see technology aiding sort of the likes of Project Servitor, and how that data is being accessed and given to frontline officers? But first, the question around whether this is being shared with NACSO.
In relation to that, the spin-off of this footfall application is that we, in the background already, we're developing a separate application that sort of geolocates all of our taskings where our officers have been, to give more in-depth information. Now, this was based on sort of CT, and actually something that I'm developing specifically for Project Servitor. And in terms of linking in with NACSO, I believe that it should be linked in with NACSO, where we can start to look at CT countrywide, where we can start to understand risk areas through information and intelligence, and we can understand risk areas through events that are happening, and therefore we can start to use Project Observatory in an interoperable way that it should be used, and get officers strategically placed based on that type of information. So the answer is definitely yes. I see that it going that way, and I really feel that there should be good collaboration between the two.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. And then just obviously you touched on interoperability there. Big challenge across policing when we're looking at, again, quality and standards, not necessarily obviously just from the data perspective, but the challenge broadly with 43 police forces all doing very different stuff, and how we can interoperate some of those systems. So definitely very relevant. And again, I think just from a community engagement piece, how were you able to interact with your communities in the response when you were policing essentially the pandemic? Was it this technology used? How was that data sort of being collected, and how were you able to respond to that? How could officers on the ground respond to that?
Well, I think initially it was a very difficult time because we went into lockdown obviously very quickly, and in terms of the police, we had to really catch up quite quickly when it came to IT systems and how we talk and function as a force. So this really helped that, because then it allowed us to do targeted engagement. And the businesses we already have good links with them, and we're providing lots for them in terms of training, etc. already. But then when you take away that sort of face-to-face link, we needed to understand the city as a whole. So they wanted to engage with us. They were very positive about that. The surveys meant that it was a very easy way for them to start to talk to us, and then we could strategically place resource as and when it was needed. So it's become better, but I think the future will be even better, where they can live talk to us through those surveys and those streams, and that system will become a lot more streamlined.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. I think Phil just wants to come in there.
Yeah, I was just going to expand on the point around interoperability, and it goes way beyond interoperability of police systems and that. The Office of National Statistics says there's 115 major conurbations with over 75,000 people in them. And I can guarantee you there are 115 separate solutions being put forward around how people are curating, managing, if they are at all, smart data and smart systems within our cities, which means that, it's a huge job to then make comparisons. It's a huge job to learn from mistakes that others have made, because we're measuring things in different ways. So that drive around interoperability, because this is happening now. It's not something we can think about to happen in 10 years' time. Cities are building these systems, often in a very ad hoc way, because that's the way funding works. So you purchase a service or you purchase a system, and then that data gets locked away. And we're going to find ourselves in 3 or 4 years' time with an enormous number of small data silos, and even where they're not small data silos, and some way has gone towards collectivizing that data to actually meet a city's needs, then there's going to be a whole bunch of city platforms that will possibly, with some jiggery-pokery chewing gum and glue, talk to each other, but it will be far from seamless. And that's a real challenge that we're trying to address through research and through work with Steve and colleagues and many others about how do we address the standards issue, given that these systems are happening now.
Yep, Steve.
On top of what Phil's saying about standards, the other thing is sort of attitude towards data. I've been working with trying to share public sector data between local authorities and healthcare and so on for years, and really not getting very far. And the primary reason for that is that there is a person in every organization responsible for not sharing data, and that's the data governance lead. And of course, very valuable role, but the safest data is data locked in a safe that nobody can access. So there's a push towards keeping data secure. There's very rarely a role on the other side of that, which is about exploiting data, about the drive to make use of data and use it as a valuable asset. And I think we need local authorities and the NHS and the blue light services to have someone whose job it is to go out there actively and push for the sharing of data and the better understanding of shared data.
Thank you, Steve. Emran, yes?
I couldn't agree more with what Steve has just said there. I think he's absolutely right. There's definitely more than one Steve in every local authority and every organisation, I suspect. But I think just to kind of push that point made around data and you know, from a local authority perspective, the reams and reams of data that we do have and that we have used is local data. It's being used locally. I haven't seen that link being made with organisations such as Steve's and other organisations that are coming to and knocking on our door and saying, hey, you know, can we tap into your data? Can we utilise and leverage that data that we have to kind of better serve and create the insight that will, you know, help us respond, you know, not just to the pandemic, but, you know, in the context of this conversation around community safety.
Phil, I think, yeah, last point, and then we'll have to start wrapping up conversation.
Just responding directly to that. So just a concrete example of that. So we've worked over the last 10 months with the Office for National Statistics, because we have a means of taking publicly available CCTV images and using those, and we process those using machine learning for pedestrian cyclist vehicles. Most cities have publicly available CCTV where they produce still images. Now, it doesn't tell you how many people are on that road. It doesn't give you a count, but it gives you a trend. And the reason why we did that with the ONS was about this being able to spin that out across multiple cities to understand economic recovery and the probably very patchy nature of that, because we're all at different starting points regionally. So I think there are ways in which it can happen. It's how we join that up and have both a top-down and a bottom-up meeting of minds that's critical, I think.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we'll just start to wrap up the conversations now. But as we do, just to close, I'd just like to ask each panelist sort of what your one key takeaway to the audience might be. So something positive to highlight, or a challenge we should be prioritizing, or maybe it's sort of an ask to the tech industry. What is that ask when it comes to sort of place or multi-agency working? So I'll start with the first person on my screen. So Emran.
I think Mandy, I'm going to let Mandy answer, because I think she's put something in the chat in terms of an ask. So Mandy.
Oh, okay. Yes, for me, it's about data. So same as Steve, but I guess it's the other way around. I think particularly when it comes to digital inclusion and tech industry and data industry definitely have more information about what's happening in our area than we do. And what do they see? What can they leverage? Because they're clearly here doing business. So what is it that they can see that we are unable to see at the moment, and looking at it from a different perspective?
Thank you, Mandy. Dan?
Sorry, Georgina, the feed went. I didn't hear what you said then.
So just to wrap up, sort of what your sort of takeaway would be from the session, what your ask to the audience might be. So it could be an ask to the tech industry when it comes to sort of place or multi-agency working, maybe a challenge you think we should be prioritizing.
I kind of echo what Phil was saying. It's about sharing information, and actually information is power. We know that we can be much better at what we do if we share better. And I do agree with that. There's a massive culture within the police about silo projects and then not linking up. And to be honest, that's kind of why we developed the system we did, because it was through Esri, and Esri can link to multiple platforms. Likewise, linking in with our corporation was a big thing for us, and utilizing their data sets. So I think the key thing is to share and to build on what we're trying to develop. So that's what I would say.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. Steve and Phil.
Well, I've already mentioned mine, so I've just
Oh yeah, over to Phil.
an emphasis on someone responsible for data in the organization. So I'll hand over to Phil.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the challenge for me is, I think there's, as we've seen here, there's huge potential and real value in the data, but actually nailing the value proposition, because it's spread thinly over the police, the health services, city governments, national governance, regional governance, well-being. It's spread so thinly that there's no one person you can point to and say, it's your responsibility, you need to fund this. So collectively, we have to understand and be able to support that value proposition to build these sorts of systems to enable us to do things we've never been able to do before.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you everyone for your summary for both local government and my programme, Cross Justice and Emergency Services. Place-based working, multi-agency working is a priority for our programmes this year. So I'm sure it was great to have these discussions, but we don't want them to just stop here. We now want to continue these conversations throughout the year as we start looking ahead at what we can achieve and look at some of the output from this session, and collectively now how we can work together to start achieving some of this. So sort of bang on 3:30. So just from me, thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you to our panel today. Really great discussion, good old mix of different ideas, initiatives, challenges, best practice shared. So thank you everybody for sharing.